with that. Hey, everybody, we're here again for the good tea tonight. It's Tuesday at 6, and we're so happy that you have decided to join us. We have another topic for you tonight. While I'm not excited about the topic, I am excited about our guests that we have that have joined us. In light of all of the different things that are going in our political climate and our racial climate here in this country, we would be tone deaf if we did not give some time and attention to the issues that are happening right now. So tonight we are talking about the Great Divide, tackling racism, injustice, and reform. We've had so many things happen. We've had wonderful rallies. We've had many things happen in response to those different events, and it leaves many of us with the question of what's next. And so we want to get to that tonight, and we're going to have some great conversation. With that, I want to take some moments to introduce everybody to you so that you know who they are. I want to start to your left on the screen, which is Representative Finney. Would you please let us know who you are?
Hello, my name is Gail Finney, Representative Finney, and I represent the 84th District in Northeast Wichita. And I've been a legislator for 6 terms, and I'm running again. And I'm glad to be here today. And as a legislator, one of the things I have done most of my career here in the legislature is fought for a lot of criminal justice reform issues. And so that's why I'm really excited to be on here today. And I like to talk about prison issues, police brutality issues, and those are some of the legislation pieces that I have supported over the years. So I'm glad to be here and join you. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us in the conversation. Right below her, you all know Pastor Mike. Hey, Pastor Mike. Glad to have you back with us again. Of course, he will help us co-moderate tonight. And then down below is DeJuan Walsh. Give us some information on you.
Hi, all. I'm DeJuan Walsh. I am a community organizer. I've worked in community organizing for a little over 8 years now. So I've been very integral in organizing a lot of the different campaigns that have occurred in Wichita and around the country. Now living out of state, but still very involved here recently in a lot of the different situations from COVID-19 to community violence and now the situation with George Floyd.
Sure thing. And then right above and next to me on the other side is County Commissioner Lacey Cruz. Tell us about yourself.
Hey, thank you. I'm Commissioner Cruz. I ran for District 4 here in Sedgwick County. Before that, a musician, healthcare worker, worked in senior living for a long time. I'm just really getting started. I've been on the commission for 1.5 years. And one reason why I ran was lack of representation from a gender standpoint. And so, being on the inside now, I'm really sort of kind of figuring out how things work. It's interesting in that sense, but I'm getting started and hopefully can get some other folks inspired to run and do the same thing.
Awesome. Thank you for being here with us. And then Bryce, I believe he's getting to a stopping point. Bryce, if you can, would you chime in and let us know about yourself?
Absolutely. I'm Bryce Graham, local resident here in Wichita, wife and 3 kids, a business owner. And I just like to get involved in community issues whenever I can, whenever I see opportunity to add some value and push the ball forward in a positive direction.
Thank you. And with that, we want to jump right into the conversation. Thank you all for being here. And we will have Mr. Al Ward joining us a little bit later on. He is a former officer, and I'll let him introduce himself once he comes on, but we want to get right into it. So as we are facing all of these different situations that have come up, we see some patterns. Just to kind of talk about them briefly, we know back in 2012, there was the Trayvon Martin situation in Florida where he was walking in his neighborhood for his father's fiance, was killed within just a few feet of the back door. Even after George Zimmerman was told not to do that and not to go apprehend him and chase him, he did it anyway as a neighborhood watch assigned lead and killed him, acquitted, insufficient evidence. He got off, walked scot-free. We have Eric Garner, 43-year-old in 2014, confronted on a street in Staten Island, New York, selling untaxed loose cigarettes. When he was pulled away, he was placed in a chokehold, restrained later, repeated, "I can't breathe," 11 times, charged, but never, the jury failed to indict any of them. Nothing happened. again, people walk away scot-free. We have Sandra Bland in 2015, minor traffic stop that escalates. She's charged and arrested for assault of an officer. 3 days later, she shows up hanging in her jail cell. Again, got in trouble. No procedures were followed during the stop. And then the perjury charge was dropped after the officer agreed to end his career. And then, of course, that brings us to now with George Floyd, which most of us who could stomach it watched this 9 to 10 minute clip of this man being held down by 3 officers. Of course, the one that was on his neck, he's saying he cannot breathe, and we're watching the life leave this man's body. The country's in an uproar. Not just the country, the world is in an uproar about how things are going. And so this leads us to really take a deeper look at racism and what racism is. As we think about this topic, before we even get too deep in it, how old were you when you faced, can you remember when you first faced your first bout with racism? And we'll start with Representative Finney.
You know, the funniest thing, as a child, I don't recall experiencing racism. My first encounter is when I worked at Boeing as a buyer. One of the things I found that working there is that I was probably more qualified, degree, more experience, but it was very difficult to get in a supervision position. So one of the things I started was a Black employees union at Boeing. And I was able to get it started. I got a chance to negotiate with the president of the company, Mr. Bob Alford at the time. And we were able to make some amendments there in the policies. So that was my first encounter. But my next encounter is actually working in the legislature. I've had legislators tell me that racism doesn't exist, racial profiling doesn't exist. And so to me, that is a form of racism. And so that's the reality of what we're dealing with. And so I'm sure as a child, there probably was a lot of discrimination back at the time, but I wasn't smart enough at the time. I was so young to even realize it at the time.
Yeah.
So no more than hear my mother talk about it, but I can't pinpoint something that actually happened when I was a little kid.
Sure. Excuse me. Pastor Mike, what about you? Do you recall your first bout?
You know, I had so many instances, not of racism, but just observing people that may have dealt with it. I mean, even when I was younger, one of the first incidences was when Rodney King was beaten by several police officers in LA. But also, you know, when I was a youngster, you know, I had some people that were biased. I had a kid at a campsite. He threw paint on me, and I ran him down to his camper, threw paint on him, but the police came after me, came to my campsite where me and my family were to try to kick us out versus the kid who initiated it. So, I mean, there's been several bouts. When I lived in New York, they had something going on when I was younger where even Black men, certain stores would not allow young Black males to come in due to, I guess, situation that happened at that time, but still being isolated, you know, as a Black male. So, I mean, there's been several accounts, and still disheartening to see that, you know, it's even more prevalent, it seems like now today than it was when I was younger.
Okay. Dawn, what about you?
You know, I gotta be honest. I mean, I grew up in this white supremacist system of education where we're not taught what racism actually is. You know, we may be taught a little bit about, you know, 1619, and, you know, that's where life began for Black folks, was in 1619 in Jamestown, according to the history books that we are read from in school. And so, you know, I didn't know very much about white supremacy or anything like that. However, my first encounter with it was I was in college at KU in Lawrence. If you've ever been to Lawrence, you know, the dorms, McCullum Hall, I think they've torn it down now, is at the top of that big old hill. And so down at the bottom of that hill is where the field house is. And I remember being called a nigger, you know, and it happened twice while I was in Lawrence, where I was called a nigger by somebody either driving a truck or a car. One was a white woman that did it, and the other was a bunch of hooligans. That was my first instance of it at 18. I'm certain that there were other instances prior to me being 18 and going to college, but, you know, it took a while before I understood what was actually happening.
Yeah. Yeah. Bryce, what about you?
So looking back on it, like Representative Finney mentioned earlier, sometimes you don't see it, or you don't see it clearly when you're younger and you don't really understand what's going on. But when I was in elementary, I believe I was in second grade, a friend of mine, who was like a family member, grew up in the same little apartment complex, was getting picked on at school by this bully. And I stood up for him and we got into an altercation, a physical altercation. And it was my first time ever being in any kind of trouble. It wasn't anything, no one had to go to the hospital. It wasn't a major ordeal. Yet they wanted to expel me from the school because the principal, I recall now looking back on it, when my parents came to the office, the principal said that I was a gang member and that she felt like I was endangering the other students and whatever the case may be. So they literally tried to expel me in the second grade for getting into like a 30-second scuffle with a kid just standing up for one of my friends. So
Wow.
that's probably the earliest memory that I had.
Yeah.
But of course, there were plenty more after that.
Yeah. Okay. And Lacey, when was the first time you were aware of the racial differences when you dealt with that?
You know, I can't really think. When I read that yesterday, is my mic better? First of all,
Yes, it is. Yeah.
it is better. Okay, sorry about that earlier. You know, I literally cannot pretend to know what it's like to be Black in America. I can't, and I can't sit here and say that I've seen it absolutely. And every time I try to do my best to stand up and address it, I can't think of the first time. There's been too many times.
Sure.
But the thing about me is I believe Black Americans. I hear their stories, I hear their fears, I hear their frustrations, and I do my absolute best to speak up when I hear about it.
Sure.
I just can't tell you the first time I remember.
Yeah. So after you ask people that and you think about it, I was talking to a therapist friend, and she is a older white woman, and she wasn't aware. She was just like, I had no clue when I was telling her mine happened in the third grade, and I was helping, when you're little and you help the teacher grade papers or something, like after you've done something. So I got to grade papers, and we were doing a crossword puzzle. And I remember his name was Brad. And I was grading papers, and I'm just really like, I get to grade papers today. And the question was, I'll never forget it. This animal swings on trees. It was supposed to say monkey. What do you think he wrote in that box? Nigger. And so my eyes were like, what? And I'm a third grader at this time. And so of course I went to the teacher, and we had a little conversation, and we had a little conference or whatever. And she told my parents about it. But I remember at that point remembering and realizing that, okay, usually this comes from adults, and it still came from somewhere. He learned that from somebody. But it was in the third grade, and it was like, you're different. And he didn't have no problem saying it. He was embarrassed. But he still did it. And I don't think he ever understood why that hurt my feelings at that time. But as I was kind of like Bryce's, that it was in elementary school. But when you think about that with the current status in America, so whatever your first memory is, what is the cause? Why are we where we are right now?
Well, for me, I think that we are where we are right now is because people, first off, don't even understand where race comes from. Oftentimes I hear people say, you talk about race too much. You talk about race too much, or I inject race into conversation. Ask the average white person where race comes from or why they are considered Caucasian, and I guarantee you that they won't be able to answer that question. Mm-hmm. It is an invention. It was created by white people to benefit white people. It was created by an anthropologist in Germany, specifically in Georgia, which is near Russia, I believe. And it was further expanded upon by a French anthropologist in a book called Systema au Naturel. And they broke it down by race. This guy used to collect skulls, and he would say, this skull that came from the Georgia, which is near Caucasus Mountains, this is the best skull, and it was just because it was white people. This is the best skull, and this is a skull that looked like God. This is what God looks like. And so Black people became Ethiopians. Native Americans became Americans. Asian people became Mongoloids, and white people became Caucasians. That was further expanded upon by government, and the system of white supremacy was born. And so that obviously happened in what I want to say 17th, 18th century. And that's the reason why we are in the predicament that we're in now. Is it was all about money too, racism and white supremacy is interrelated with capitalism, because when you think about what caused the American slave system, it was propped up to benefit these wealthy landowners, and it was a benefit to them to pit the slaves against the poor white people, so everybody is impacted by the system of white supremacy. Mm-hmm. And it was all so that a few people could make some money.
That's right.
I think you add from there where Dewan Wash left off is that from there you end up getting police, but the police were assigned, or I forgot what they called them back at the time.
Slave.
They were,
It was slave patrols.
The slave patrols. And so I think that's where the beginning cause began. From there, here we have today, when you look at police and the way that we've been treated, it goes all the way back to that. And it's always about protecting property. But at the same time, we don't have the defenses that or the privilege that some of the other people have. Mm-hmm. And I think that's what makes a big difference, and it puts us at a disadvantage. And even though we try to lift our voice on these issues, a lot of times we're silenced or ignored. And so that creates a distrust and an anger, and in my opinion, an uprising, what we're having today. We're tired, sick and tired of being discriminated against. We're sick and tired of being abused by the police. We're sick and tired of being ignored by our legislature and people that are in power that makes decisions on our behalf without our consideration or our input. So sure. I think that's why we are here today.
Sure.
I also think it's the discomfort of white folks not wanting to stick up for folks. I think it's the discomfort that, I even find in myself. I want to do the right thing, but I don't know really how to do it. And so for me, it's listening and understanding where people come from, how I can be an ally and how I can stand up for folks. But it is not comfortable. Mm-hmm. And people don't like to be uncomfortable. Mm-hmm. And until you can get to a place where you can use the term Black people, where you can use the term brown people in a meeting full of white people, I don't think, you have to stand up and use those terms. We can't, I just read something the other day. You talk about colorless. I have to teach my children to talk about Black people, understanding using these terms. Allies have to be, you have to get out of your comfort zone. And I'll tell you, it's not simple, and it's not easy, and it's complicated. But until that happens, we're going to be right where we're at.
Commissioner Lacey, you brought up a good point about being uncomfortable. And a lot of times when that is true, when you hear somebody that is white say that is very true. But I always think about it from that perspective and say, if you're uncomfortable mentioning it, imagine being Black. You know what I'm saying? In certain situations where you're having to police and govern yourself or re-govern yourself to make sure that you fit into the situation that's happening, or you have to make sure, now don't act crazy when you go in here, don't be doing this because they're going to think this, don't talk a certain way because they're going to respond to this. I'll never forget when President Obama was elected for the second term, and I was at a different job at the electric company, and there was another Black guy in the office, and I think it was just he and I that was on that whole entire floor. And we had to wait until we got out of the hallway. We just happened to be in the hallway at the same time. And he walked out the door, and we got on the elevator, and he was like, man, I've been holding it in all day because I have been wanting to just celebrate. But my daddy told me yesterday, I got to chill. Don't go in there acting. And it was like, so you can't have a different opinion. You have to govern yourself back because of what your white peers might think. That creates a very strange dynamic. Go ahead, Pastor Mike.
No, I'm glad you mentioned that. And my silence has really been in restraint because I've been feeling some kind of way for a few days now. This morning I woke up and I saw an article in Google News that's talking about the Ford Motor executive, Bill Ford, and how he sent a letter to all of his employees talking about the tragic killing of George Floyd. And what he said was, there are no easy answers. We are not interested in superficial actions. This is our moment to lead from the front and fully commit to creating the fair, just, and inclusive culture that our employees deserve. And that did so much for me this morning, regardless of what his heart intent is, if it's just a, it's a trendy thing or what have you, the fact that he acknowledged it from a corporate sector and is addressing it to his employees. I got on a conference call this morning at work. I won't name my job, and I brought about a conversation I had with the employee yesterday. He's like a brother to me. He's of the Caucasian persuasion, and he's like a brother. And he told me, he said, Mike, I don't know what it's like to be African-American male, but just know that our family loves you. We appreciate you. And I've been talking to my wife and my children about what's going on so that they're aware. And I commended him in the conference call. I said, I really appreciate him and his empathetic words. And one of the other peers on the call, good job, buddy. He tells, acknowledging what my friend did, but other than that, it was dead silence. And where I work at, it's predominantly white in the department that I'm in. I've been in those departments for several years to where I'm the only Black person that comes in. And then if I do right, then they bring in other African-American men. You know what I'm saying? So I'll be honest with you, it's very uncomfortable, but it's people like my coworker. And then I had another person that called me after that and prayed with me, Caucasian. He admitted it as well. I think the issue is people not really wanting to acknowledge what's taking place. And then also the systemic environment of racism that we've kind of just patted along the way, and we've just conformed, and just really being able to be authentically us, and it's still being okay. Whether it be from the hair that we wear into the workplace, whether it be the clothes that we wear, or even the jargon or language that we utilize, it being stereotyped as being ignorant or not accepted. And I don't want to take up too much time, but this is a topic that's long overdue.
So what's changed? I love the history. I love the history of, the civil rights and looking at that and learning about it. And I read a new book and you learn about all of those things and the struggles and the battles and how much that they went through back as we like to say right now in the MLK times. What's changed from then to now?
Part of it is our new leadership. I shouldn't say our new leadership, but our current leadership at the top has really inflamed a lot of insecurities in a lot of people. And we feel very discomfortable in the United States right now, in my opinion. If you look at the news on I shouldn't say a daily basis, I mean, you can't even say an hourly basis. Mm-hmm. We're always hearing different things that are intimidating and threatening coming from the top and from the alt-right sometimes. And so with that being the land that we're in nowadays, it just perpetuates and it increases and magnifies the issues that we have in here. And so when you have something that happened like happened to Mr. Floyd, in addition to all the things, other incidents that we've had over the years, you can't help but to want to rise up and fight sometimes. But, I want to make sure that I say one thing today. Even though we're experiencing this, we can make a change with this. One of the things I think that we haven't done is, what would really wake up the population if we took this momentum and this energy that we have, that we want to make a change, go register to vote, get as many people, white, black, and brown, to the polls and vote, and turn the leadership and the powers to be, it will wake up a lot of people.
Yeah.
So I think we really need to concentrate on that, in addition to getting more women, more people that actually care and concern. But one of the problems we have too, you have a lot of people in America and in Kansas, they vote against their own best interests. And when you have that, sometimes it might be ignorance or lack of information, or they don't care. But we have got to make a change there. And I tell you, we really have power within ourselves if we actually get out there, register to vote, register your parents, your friends, your neighbors, whoever it is, and get them to the polls to make a difference. Because let me tell you what's going on. When you look at the legislature, you'll find we have 8 African Americans. A lot of people don't realize we introduce these bills every year on racial profiling, police brutality, civil asset forfeitures. The list goes on and on and on. But when you don't have people in there that support you or that give a darn about it, those pieces of legislation don't go anywhere because you don't have the right people in office that can make a difference. You got to have people in office that are not afraid to stand up to introduce a legislation, but it takes more than just one. Ain't that right, Ms. Lacey? You have to get more people elected that support your views.
Sure.
Otherwise, you could uprise all day long. Until you get the powers to change and get the right people in office, you're going to still be having problems
right here
for a long time to come.
Sure.
Yeah.
Before we go down to Dewan, Lacey, did you have a follow up to that? I think
Yeah, you know, Representative Finney, you are exactly right. And I was even crafting a message today talking about registering to vote, but running to vote. This is running to get these elected positions. I tell you, that's what one side has been doing. They're very organized. What we have is people. We just have to organize ourselves and understand. I mean, when I ran for office, I don't look like a typical politician. I'm not an old white guy, right? And listen, I know a lot of really great old white guys, but I'm telling you, there is this mentality that you have to have a law degree or you have to be this type of person or have these kinds of connections. Well, you don't. And the thing is, somebody told me I was going to have to raise $100,000 to win this seat. I walked, I knocked every single door that I could, and I raised $28,000. So I think that there's this mentality that it's just always been that way. And so that's how you win office. No, it's determination, believing in yourself, and then getting those folks around you to, I mean, it's so incredible that to think you have to do it from the inside. Like I've been on the inside, I guess now for a year and a half, and I see how it works. But you have to change it from the inside, and you have to have the guts to put yourself on the ballot, because it's very frightening. But there are people who will help, and you're so right, Gail. You're so right. We have to have more than just a couple people in there, because I'm telling you, 1 of 5 commissioners, y'all see how that's going.
Go on, go ahead.
You know, I just wanted to also close a point on that we were talking about previously about code switching. You know, like we have to code switch all the time. Like they got a term for it. You know, in the workplace, we got to be different than where we are when we at home. The reality of the situation is that Black folks is tired of having to code switch and having to try and fit into this system. You know, that's just the plain reality of it. You know, I'm tired of tiptoeing around these issues, trying to make white people comfortable. You know, I didn't create race. You know, I'm impacted by it. You know, but I don't know what the N word is. So when people say, "Oh, they said the N word," well, what do you mean, necromancy, Nancy? You know, like what are you talking about? You know, say that's what you mean. You know, when somebody is doing something like the president said thugs. No, he wanted to say. You know, let's speak truth about what these people are doing. You know, let's not tiptoe around it anymore. When you look at what's changed is respectability politics, like what Commissioner Cruz was just talking about. You got to look this certain way, act this certain way. You know, you got to do this and that, get your little awards and all this, that, and the other. No, I'm not about that today. Today, I'm about speaking truth to power, you know, and speaking about real issues. That's what's changed. I remember a skit between Richard Pryor and Chevy Chase, you know, back in the 70s when they were talking about honky, you know, and that's what's changed, you know. Then that was on TV, you know, that they was talking about these things. Now you can't say stuff on TV, you know, without people getting all into a tizzy about it. And so our inability to actually speak truth to power about these issues is something that has changed. It's something that has been very regressive. There has been a lot of progress. I think that it's important for us to recognize that progress, you know, but it's not a matter of saying that there isn't more work to be done. You know, how can you dismantle a system that's been in place for over 400 years? You know, within 40 to 50 to 60 years. The Civil Rights Act was passed in 1968, you know. So we are doing a lot of the same things that we did then, you know, and we're having a lot of the same conversations that we had then. And both Representative Finney and Commissioner Cruz is absolutely right in regard to understanding that people have to understand how this system works. If my engine on my car is broke, I can go out there and yell at it all day long. Is it going to work because I'm yelling at it? No, it's probably not going to start with just me yelling at it. You know, I have to either have the tools, and not only the tools, I have to have the skills, because having a tool without the skills to use it is useless. You know, so I have to have the tools and the skills in order to be able to fix the problem. We had more Black people in Congress and throughout the South in the 1860s and 70s than at any other point in time in history. Why do you think that Chris Kobach, the Secretary of State for the state of Kansas, was pushing out voter ID laws across the entire country? Because it matters. You know, they don't want us to be able to vote. They don't want us to be able to get into office, you know, because that stuff matters. Because if they keep the stranglehold onto power, it benefits everybody on their side, you know, to not have us in office, advancing issues that are important and that we care about.
Sure.
Not to mention gerrymandering of neighborhoods and districts.
Absolutely. All the time, all day long. That's what they do. In the 1860s and 70s, all throughout the South. Where do you think we went to after Reconstruction? You know, we stayed in Mississippi, places like that. We started and established our own towns, became our own mayors, became our own chiefs of police, our own lawyers, our own grocers. We had all those things. Everybody talks about Tulsa and Greenwood and Black Wall Street like that was the only city that was successful for Black people. We were successful people long before then.
So I got a question, and we're going to segue between Bryce, and thank you for joining us, Mr. Ward. He's a former officer, and we want to take just a few minutes for you to introduce yourself to us as well.
My name is Al Ward. I was a police officer here in the city for 20 plus years. Prior to that, I was in the military and served in the police in the military as well. I retired in 2015 and spent most of my time up north working Patrol North Bureau. Now I'm a small business owner, again, still in Patrol North Bureau. So.
Thank you for tapping in. So before we move to some rights so we can talk about that, I just have a question. Have we seen the worst? Have we seen the worst of this?
That all depends.
All of it.
Probably, yeah. Go ahead, Al. We keep cutting each other.
No. Go ahead.
You know, I was gonna say probably not. You know, honestly, because the other three officers, the murderers, have not yet been arrested. You know, Dr. Michael Biden just came out with the autopsy report that said, you know, that he would not only die from the compression of his neck and asphyxiation from that, but also died from compression of his lower back and his lower limbs. You know, so the officer that killed him, Officer Chauvin, was not the only one that is responsible. You know, so until things actually change, and when I say things actually change, I mean having some actual accountability, getting some district attorneys in office that are progressive, that will actually hold these officers accountable at the drop of a dime, and that are willing to go against the fraternal orders of police that are protecting these bad apples and protecting these bad officers. Things are not going to change, and things are going to continue to get worse, primarily because we have this buffoon in the White House that is inflamed, you know, these sorts of situations, you know. And so when those sorts of things happen, you know, when we work to try and organize like we did to get Chief Ramsey into office, and we can change those things. All we got to do is find out what system of government we have, whether it's a strong mayor system of government where you got to put pressure on the mayor, or you have a weak mayor system like we do in Wichita, and you have to put pressure on the city manager, you know, who's the boss of these people. All these people got bosses in government, you know, and as the people, they work for us. What we have to do is organize in order to be able to get things done. So no, I don't think that things are going to get better. I think that things are going to get worse. And honestly, I think that things should get turned up, you know, because at the end of the day, we're tired. You know, we're tired of having the same conversations about these issues over and over and over and over again. And I'm not going to be the one that's going to sit up and be judgmental about people who are expressing their pain, their frustration, their anger, and their hurt, and who are not being heard. Because everybody knows what the problem is. He murdered a man on video for 8 minutes. You know, did you not see the video? I personally haven't seen it because I don't need to see it. But, you know, we know what the issues are. They're the same issues like what Representative Finney said. The police have always been doing this to us. That was their purpose, both in the North and the South. You can talk about the Minutemen in the North. They was there for the red men. Who was they protecting the colonies from? They wasn't protecting it from themselves.
So,
you know?
So with that, we have all these things that are going on. And when you kind of step back from everything and you're looking at all these, what is the difference with this particular case? Is it that we only caught it on camera and we can't deny it? Because just a few weeks ago when it was Ahmaud Arbery, we kept hearing, well, we don't know what happened before. Why is it that in this country, the black man, the black woman, the black person is deemed guilty until proven innocent in those situations. Why is that? Because this is a different thing. There was a straight tape of 9 to 10 minutes, and now, only now, are we hearing people that are like, okay, this is out of control. This is out of control. Is it because we see it? What is that?
I think
a lot of, oh, go ahead. No, go ahead, Al.
I think a lot of it has to do with the fact of it is getting more and more egregious. I mean, we're seeing so much of it, and it's becoming so brutal that people are now becoming afraid. It's happening so often, people are like, this actually could be me.
Mm-hmm.
And this could be my son. This could be my daughter.
So with that,
and it doesn't happen. Georgia proved that it doesn't have to be a big city. It can be a small city. It can be anywhere. With the other one that happened in Georgia, I think it was in Georgia, where they ran up on the porch and tried to force their way into a black home. To me, that took me all the way back to how they used to drag us out of the house and lynch us in the front yard. And that even pushes me more to be more vocal now. And I've gotten to the point where I'm tired of being kumbaya. I'm tired of that. To see that man beg for his life and to go on himself and watch it run down into the gutter. And then even after he was dead, they applied no CPR. They didn't try to resuscitate him, and they just picked him up, put him in there, and drove off, as if they were picking up a dog off the street that had been hit by a car. I think that those things are going to make a drastic difference in the way that we see going in the future, how we deal with these situations.
Not only are they so egregious, but they had confidence. They knew in their minds that there was going to be no repercussion for what they were doing. Did you see the look in that man's eye and the other guy that just standing there? They're like, oh, this is just part of the job. And so I think that's what they were actually seeing that. To me, it reminded me of a snake wrapping an animal and just confident looking around like nothing's going to happen. I just thought that was just so terrible when people look at that, and the people that are in the audience, I mean, not the audience, the viewers. If I had been there, I'd been wanting to go over there and just hit the police officer upside his head themselves. But you were so afraid that you might be the next victim just for want to get involved. And so everybody, like you said, they think that could be them or their black sons or someone that they know. And it's just really terrifying to live in a nation where you have to live with that fear amongst everyone. And so I'm hoping that there will be a change, but I'm like Jawan. I don't think we're going to see a change come anytime soon. I think we're probably going to see more of this, unfortunately, until there's some federal and state legislative policies that have oversight and actual legislation that makes some changes on this.
Right. And the thing with the viewer, I saw that immediately. What you're talking about was right after they did that. You saw people, don't film me, help me. Don't film me, help me. And for me, I battled with that one because the girl filming she's a teenager. And so just think about the trauma that she's experiencing filming this, knowing something is wrong. I know I think all of us might have felt like at 17 or 16, we probably were doing the best we could, but we probably had a lot to learn at 16 and 17 years old. But I even recognized the guy that stepped off the curb, and he was going the whole time. He wouldn't stop. He was yelling and he was trying to get them to stop, and he stepped off the curb. And then the officer Tao challenged him and said, step off this curb again. So he was ready for whatever was to come next, even after the guy was challenging his authority with trying to step off to help the guy that was on the ground, to help George Floyd that was on the ground.
I don't know if you remember, do you remember not too long ago, there was a black cop that killed a white woman. Where is he at?
He's in jail.
He's in jail. Where the black cop at that shot the little girl? You know, it was an accident, but you know, it's been a number of times that black cops have been prosecuted for shooting people. We want to see these white cops that's on there getting, you know, that's been beating people up for years, you know, and don't go to jail.
Well, that was the rebuttal. I don't know what kind of racism that's called, Dewan, but that was the rebuttal that one lady said. I didn't see the outcry when this white woman was killed by the police.
I saw that. You know, they love, white people love to have the thing about called reverse racism, which ain't real. You know, because black people can be prejudiced. You know, now as I don't want to say because we with the church, so I ain't gonna use no bad words, but
Please don't.
You know, we can be very prejudiced too. You know, but at the end of the day, we can't be racist in a system that was designed for us to be impacted by. You know, like, and at the end of the day, this stuff has always been going on. People ain't forgot. Right. You know, there are lots more cameras that are rolling, but I was a very strong advocate for body cameras at one point until I wasn't. You know, because then I recognized that CORA, the Kansas Open Records Act, you know, prevents those body camera footage from being released. You know,
I don't know if you remember, Dewan, I was the one who introduced that body camera bill, and then I guess they figured we'll show Finney. They turned it into a Records Request Act.
Exactly.
That's the type of games that they play.
That's the type of games that get played. They move around. We were supposed to go to Topeka and meet, so we'll organize, get a bunch of people ready to go, and then all of a sudden, because Rep. Finney or Senator Fascado aren't the chairs of those committees, so now the date has changed at the last minute.
Yeah.
You know, so now people can't go. So now there ain't nobody there. So now they saying, well, this bill has no support, so we're not gonna pass it. You know, like yeah. Go ahead, Al.
Commissioner Cruz, you said you were going to say something. I'm sorry.
Well, actually, Al, I really want him to touch on this because when it comes down to policies and procedures, so the thing about, you know, the Minnesota cops, you know, it isn't, here locally, you can't put your knee on someone's neck, but there it's a technique and it hasn't been abolished up there. And so, you know, it could be, you know, I hope that this doesn't happen, but I'm sure defense attorneys are going to say, well, he was just following protocol, right? And so, Al, I'd love for you to speak on protocols and those kinds of things, because I feel like some people, they like to stand behind that policy, that procedure, and say, well, it's okay, I can do it. Doesn't matter if it's right or wrong. My policy book over here says I can.
Right. Excellent.
Well, there is a policy and procedure on how to effect an arrest. And you can use no more force than is necessary to effect the arrest. In this situation, the arrest had already been made. He was on the ground and they were in control. There was no reason for the knee to the neck. There is a use of force continuum that police officers have to follow. And they are trained constantly in the use of force continuum because sometimes it does evolve. When tasers came out, the use of force continuum evolved. But there are techniques that are used, and I hate to tell you this, but that technique is used in Wichita. It may not be policy and procedure, but it is used in Wichita. If you have a car chase and the person runs out, jumps out, bails out, however you want to say it, and they run, they catch that person, they put them on the ground, and there's two officers, one of the first things that's going to happen is they're going to control his head. And by controlling his head, they're going to put their knee in his neck. That happens all the time, even here in Wichita, but never to the extent that what we saw in Minnesota. Another thing I want to talk about is that I actually called a defense attorney and we talked about the incident that happened because I wanted to know what my rights were or how I could have effectively involved myself in that encounter. And one of the things that we learned or we talked about is the fact that you have the right to defend the life of a third party. That's law. You can do that. And the difference is that they were police officers. Now, if he was an ordinary citizen, I would have been justified in using lethal force in stopping this encounter. But being that he's a police officer, that's not, you can't do that. But what you can do is, and what I would have, if I had been there, what I would hope I would have done would have been to run out there, not to challenge, run out there and actually knock him off of the person. It wouldn't have taken that much air to giving him an opportunity to catch his breath. Knock him off and then surrender myself. Not to show that I'm not trying to obstruct the arrest, I'm trying to save the life. And knock him off, get him some air, surrender myself, and prepare for the beating that's about to come, because it's coming, and the arrest that's about to come.
Yeah.
But at least he would have been alive. And that's
Right.
important. Now, go ahead.
No. Please continue.
Now, when you talk about policy and procedure, every person has to read policy and procedure when they come on the department. As a matter of fact, the first week or two, that's all you do. You read aloud in class policy and procedure. So there's no way that you can say, I didn't know policy and procedure said that. You're actually tested over policy and procedure to make sure that you know it. A lot of people do hide behind the fact that, well, it's in policy. And the reason for that is because they know that if it's in policy, that the department will provide them representation. If it's in policy, they will provide them legal counsel, support, and everything else. And so a lot of things that you see that happen, they try to use policy and procedure to cover it. But like my brother here said, they're slick and they move around. I saw a person get choked one time, and what he did was say, I didn't choke him, but I temporarily restrained him from swallowing. That's a choke. And that flew. That flew because it's within policy. I temporarily restrained him from choking because he had something in his, from swallowing because he had something in his mouth. That's a choke. And so it's all in the way that they do that. Now, one of the things that happened here in Wichita was that for many years, there were only white officers up north. And after a while, when black officers started coming up north, there became some real, unrest amongst the officers. You had white officers that would not back black officers. They wouldn't back them. They wouldn't give them the support that they needed in a dangerous situation. And it ended up that they ended up having to call a meeting of all of the officers that worked up north and have us sit down and try to work out our differences, that we would actually get support from them on dangerous encounters. And some of those people are still on the department today. And so what ended up happening was the department came up with a new policy that says if you see something that is happening and you don't intervene, or if you know of something that happened and you don't tell, then you will receive the same punishment or be guilty of a policy that the police department has enacted. And that's the way they tried to end that practice. But for a long time, it was real bad up north, even amongst the officers.
Al, can I ask you a question? I'm fairly new. I'm not gonna say fairly new, but I didn't grow up here in Wichita, Kansas. And at the protest over the weekend, and from what I hear from those from decades ago, they're familiar with this person, Dirty Harry. Well, I'd want to find out, or just getting your perspective, how do you police the police when you got someone that so causes so much fear in a neighborhood as a resident of the neighborhood, and then also other police officers being able to police him? Because from what I hear, that person or individual was never really dealt with in regards to some of the shady things that were done throughout that neighborhood, throughout north.
I've known Bachman, is his real name. I've known Bachman for over 20 plus years. I can't speak to what Bachman did before I was on the department, but I can speak to some of the stuff that he did while I was on the department. The way he got the name Dirty Harry has nothing to do with him taking drugs and doing this and doing that. The way he got the name Dirty Harry was the unconventional way that he did some things. Harry would hide in trees and watch you. He would hide on top of buildings. He did all kinds of things that were unconventional, or people didn't they were unconventional. And so people are like, man, that's dirty. That's dirty. You dirty for doing that. Another thing that all officers have done, all of us, we have what's known as a RIP. We'll let you go buy the weed. We'll let you go buy whatever. And then when you come out, we're going to take it from you. And when we take it from you, we're going to list you as a suspect and we're going to turn it in, or we're going to destroy it. And it's called a RIP. All of us have done it. You know, people go and they buy drugs, they come out, we take the weed from them, we rip the bags open and throw the weed in the wind. You lost your money and your dope. And a lot of people say, well, that's dirty. It may be, if that's what you want to call it, but those are called RIPs, and they happen in every nation. I mean, every state in the United States.
Okay, so
I got the name.
Can I hop in real quick?
Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I do want to touch on, though, is the reality, first off, that with those black officers. I worked for Shores Williamson and Ohio-Sim in 2005 when Officer Fulcher decided to file a class action lawsuit against Norman Williams and the city of Wichita for some of the practices that you discussed. Only 2 of those officers remain when I returned to Wichita in 2013 from that suit. You know, Wanda Givens, who is now a deputy chief, she wasn't in the suit, but she's well aware of it. But you know, those practices did happen under the watch of Norman Williams. So, you know, just because an officer is black, grew up on 9th in Cleveland, don't mean, you know, that they for the people. You know, you can be blue-black as far as I'm considered, like Norman Williams was, because, you know, when he put that gun in that man's mouth, you know, he didn't care that that man was from the community. You know, so we have to be able to speak truth to these things about what some of these officers are doing in terms of terrorizing our community, regardless of whether they black, blue, purple, orange, you know, or pink. I don't care. You know,
Let me jump in. I'm sorry to cut you off, but there was something that you said that I need to correct real quick. Tommy Fulcher was not the person who sued the department. There was actually, wait, let me finish. There was actually 21 of us, and we met all the time. We used Tommy Fulcher as the front person.
Right, he's the main plaintiff.
Right.
Where I worked at the law firm. I'm the one that filed the paperwork.
Yeah, but there was 21 of us.
Right.
If you came back in 2013, I was still there.
Yep.
Wanda was there.
Yep.
And a couple other people that I'm not going to name.
Right.
They were still there. But most of them had either been fired or forced to retire.
Right. That's what I'm saying, because of what happened is that under those the exact same things that you talked about, they were forced off of the force, and this is some of the issues that the community is facing in terms of having representation. You know, how you gonna have these white boys that live in 2 cities over, you know, or come from Hayes, you know, that are racist, and we know they racist because they ain't never lived around black people, ain't never, did business with black people. All they see is black people on TV. They see cops, and that's what they think they gonna play. It's some cops and robbers when they move to the big city, because Wichita is a big city in Kansas. So they get to play cops and robbers and come to the hood and beat up on some niggas. You know, like that's their mindset. You know that.
Go ahead.
You know, and so I understand, because like I said, I was there. I was the one that filed the paperwork. Had to go on over across the street and file the federal paperwork to file that class action lawsuit, which never made it past summary judgment, because the other thing that we have to deal with is these judges in the 18th district that won't allow these sorts of complaints to move forward when you have black people that are in these positions who are trying to fight back and sue the city and hold folks accountable. You have these judges that are working in concert with these defense attorneys and keep people out of power. That's why we haven't been able to get a progressive district attorney.
One of the things.
And then I need to move on to the next topic so we can make sure that we leave people with something tangible that they can utilize. Go ahead, Mr. Ward.
One of the things that happened during that lawsuit was there were 21 officers who sued the city and Norman Williams for racial discrimination, the practices that they use for promotion and things of that nature. An expert during the time that the women sued the department,
Right.
came back and said that it would be easier for a man to be struck by lightning twice while standing on the corner in Denver, Colorado, than it is for a black man to be promoted on the Wichita Police Department. So that was one of the reasons that we filed suit. Now, the thing was, during that, I remember having 5 internal affairs investigations open on me at one time, because I was one of the people that was filing the lawsuit. So as a way of trying to get us back, I had 5 open investigations, and it was crazy. And it was thrown out because a certain person had friends, and one of them became a judge. And we actually filed in Kansas City to keep it away from Wichita for that very reason. He went to Kansas City, got the lawsuit, brought it back, and dismissed it.
Oh, wow.
So,
Wow.
you know.
So I know we could get into a lot of those practices that seem a little shoddy, but as we see protesters, we see things happening with people in homes, we see people being stopped by police. I want to make sure that we know, as individuals that live in America, I want to go through 3 things, and if we can just kind of hit them quickly. As a protester, what are my rights as a protester?
Well, for one, my rights as a protester is that I have a right to peacefully assemble. You know, so I don't need to have no permit. You know, now in some places where you got to have a permit. The Constitution belongs to Black people too. You know, so I have every right to peacefully assemble and have my voice heard. You know, when it comes to being exercising my voice and exercising my rights. You know, I have every right to be able to petition for things to be able to be changed, petitioning our elected officials and petitioning other government representatives to be able to gain some change. You know, so there are lots of different tools that you have the ability to do. I mean, you technically ain't supposed to break no laws, but in organizing, we call that civil disobedience. Sometimes laws will have to be broken, you know, especially if they are unjust laws. You know, unjust laws have every right to be broken from a moral perspective. You know, you should break unjust laws, you know. So those things are what I would consider an inherent right as opposed to something that isn't outright. You know, but those are your rights as protesters. You have your right to take over streets, do whatever you feel like you need to do to peacefully assemble. However, if you do so, be ready and willing to deal with the repercussions of that, because sometimes those actions do have consequences. So if you plan to do civil disobedience, you know, I would recommend that folks have bail funds set up for people, you know, legal defense funds that are set up for people. Like what's going on right now is just a bunch of craziness. You know, you just out there yelling and screaming and hollering. And when you had no organization to it, that's how people ultimately get hurt, you know. Because you have no marshals that are there to marshal people, help keep them in the right place. You have no police liaison. You shouldn't have every Tom, Dick, Harry, Sue, and Mary talking to the police, you know, because you don't know what they're saying to them. So, you know, you need to meet ahead of time and in order to plan out this protest, have those people, those marshals, those police liaisons, you know, and then you need to make your crowd aware of who these individuals are. If you have a question about something, that's the person you go to. If you have a question about police, that's who you go to. You know, so that way it limits what is happening. Because what I'm saying now, and from what I'm hearing about what's currently happening in Wichita, you have a lot of white supremacists that are coming in flaming tensions, shooting guns, because it was not Black people that were shooting guns, it was white supremacists that were shooting guns. So we need to get that information out to the community, you know, but you have to have some training to identify what an agent provocateur looks like. Somebody that's not a part of the crowd, you know, somebody that's standing off to the side, somebody that don't nobody know. And you looking like, well, who is this dude? You know, and don't nobody know them, you know, but this person is asking questions. Even where I am yesterday, we had somebody show up and just quite frankly ask, well, when does the looting start? Well, we didn't come here for that. You know, so let's make sure we keep an eye on this guy, because when they throw a brick, they're not blaming you. They're going to blame us.
Sure. So with that, what next thing, what as a homeowner, police want to come to my house. What are, and maybe Mr. Ward, you can speak to this. What are my rights as a homeowner? You're coming without a warrant, with a warrant. So if you can give me two of those, briefly give me two of those different scenarios.
With a warrant. If he comes with a warrant, he has every right to enter the house. If it's signed by a judge, he has every right to enter the house. He has every right to kick the door if he has to. He has every right. Here in Kansas, we do have no-knock warrants where they don't say anything. They go up, they bust windows, they kick doors, and they throw flashbangs, and they go do what they do. There's not much you can do about that. If it is no warrant, if he has no warrant, then he does not have a right to enter the residence unless there are exigent circumstances within the residence. Somebody's being hurt, he's chasing somebody, they run into a house. Those are considered exigent circumstances, and yes, he's able to enter the house without your permission. But when it comes to a search or something of that nature, there needs to be a warrant. And if he doesn't have a warrant, you don't have to allow him access.
Okay.
I want to throw this in there too. If you're walking down the street and a police officer pulls over and gets out the car and walks up to you and says, hey, I want to talk to you for a moment, and he pulls you over to the side, if you stop, you don't have to stop.
Okay.
It has to be that he believes that a crime has been committed, is being committed, or is about to be committed. And if you're just walking down the street and there's nothing going on, he gets out the car and says, hey, come here. My response is, for what? I just want to talk to you. No, am I being detained? If I'm being detained, then yes. If I'm not being detained, then I'm going about my business and I'm gone.
Okay.
So,
okay.
You know,
for those, so you said unless it's like an extenuating circumstance, if somebody comes to your house, an officer comes to your house, there's been, a lady gave me an example that she had a black friend over. She was a white lady. The neighbors called the police because they thought that perhaps he was breaking and entering that house. Did she have any obligation as homeowner? He came to the door and said, are you okay? And she's like, yes. And she said she slammed the door in his face because she was mad. She knew what was up after he came in and he was like, I think your neighbors are going to call the police. And they did. What was her responsibility as homeowner there where there wasn't, I mean, you just got a call?
Well, normally what I would do is I'd say, can we step outside for a moment? And if she step outside, I would say, okay, we got a call. This is the deal. And are you okay? And if she says, yes, I'm okay, she's separated from the person that was in the house.
Sure.
And if she says she's okay, then I'm gone. There's nothing else for me to do.
Does she have to allow them in her house?
Absolutely not.
No.
Okay. Okay.
It could have turned bad. Go ahead.
What'd you say?
I'm sorry?
I was going to say it could have turned bad because of the way she handled it, though, because in the officer's mind, if I'm called to a place, a residence for a welfare check, and there's somebody that's in the house, you know, and you slam the door in the face, I don't know if this person got a gun to your head or is behind you, behind the door, got a gun, you know. So there are situations where you should talk to the police.
Absolutely.
And there are situations where you shouldn't, you know. In that particular example, you know, what Officer Ward said or what Al said, I think would have been the appropriate thing.
Sure. And she didn't say that they questioned her. She said, I'm fine. This is she asked him outright, did somebody call the police on my friend that was here? And so they kind of went through that, but she was so upset. She was like, I'm cutting this short. We're not even going to go there. Bye. So I think that was done, but I wanted to know if she needed to allow him in her house in that instance. And then you gave us a really good scenario, Mr. Ward, about walking. But what about if I'm stopped by the police? What are my rights? What do I have to answer? And I think most of us have been stopped by the police. I was stopped and the guy started asking me, where are you coming from? Where are you going? And I'm like, what you stopping me for? A messed up tail light. Just let's get to it. Why are you asking? I don't want to talk. I don't want to have small talk with you. But that's how it felt. So what are the actual rights as an individual when you're stopped for a traffic stop?
Or a traffic stop. I was going to ask you mean walking down the street or a traffic stop? On a traffic stop, you're supposed to, by the Kansas handbook, keep your driver's license and your insurance with you at all times, and your registration. So if an officer stops you, one of the first things is get his name and his ID number, not his badge number. His badge means absolutely nothing. It's an inventory number. So you get his ID number and you ask him, what was it that you stopped me for? Now, most officers will walk up and they will ask you because it's a technique, because they'll say, do you know why I stopped you? And you'll say, yes, I was speeding. Well, when he fills out that ticket, he's going to write on the back that you admitted to speeding.
Right, right.
Okay. So when they ask you, why did I stop you? Just ask them, I don't know. Why did you stop me? And they'll tell you. And if they don't tell you, then you just keep asking the question, why did you stop me?
Mm-hmm.
But you do have to present your driver's license. Now, do you have to sign the ticket? No, you don't. But you do have to prove who you are if you're driving the vehicle, because that is a bookable offense. If an officer cannot identify you, it was in policy and procedure that he could, under his discretion, arrest you for, not having a driver's license with you and driving. None of us would do it, but he could.
Okay.
So the thing is,
asking what am I stopped for?
right? Providing the driver's license. Mm-hmm. Now, if he asks you to get out of the car, why? Why do I need to get out of the car? Well, I just prefer to talk to you out of the car. No, I don't want to get out of the car. If he doesn't have anything in plain sight, then there's no Carroll doctrine. If he can't smell marijuana, there's no Carroll doctrine. So that means that he doesn't have a right to search your vehicle. And they're going to ask you, and the way that it's done, and he can't hold you for an unreasonable amount of time either. So the way that it's done, they write the ticket, and then after they write the ticket, they say, hey, can I talk to you for a moment? Your answer should be, are we done with the traffic stop? If he says yes, then leave. If he says no, then you have to stay. But if he says yes, leave. Do not engage him in conversation, because the next thing is, hey, I do this from time to time. I'm looking for guns, bazookas, marijuanas, kilos. And you're thinking in your mind, I have no kilos, I have no bazookas, I have no grenades. So it's okay for him to search the car. But you forgot about that dime bag that you had earlier that may have residue in it. And that's where they're going to get you. So no, you don't have to let them search your car unless they have a valid reason. And once they finish with the car stop, they go into the second phase. You don't have to stay for the second phase. You can leave. And you don't have to get out of the car unless there's something dangerous or he's got a valid reason. Go ahead.
So I have a question, and I'm sorry for interjecting. I had a friend of mine over the weekend. He was stopped. He had a car that had new tags. It was in the rear window. So the police stopped him for that. Showed proper documentation of the purchase of the vehicle. The police officer then asked him to get out of the car, and he refused. And the officer told him, if you don't get out, I'm going to pull you out. And he got out of the car just to avoid the altercation, and he called about 2 or 3 other police vehicles to search his vehicle for drugs. So in a situation like that, what would be your best recommendation? I mean, if he provided the documentation to show proof of purchase for the vehicle and everything's clear there, I mean, what right did he have at that point in time?
Not everything that is lawful may be expedient. In other words, he could have said, no, I'm not getting out until you give me a valid reason to get out. But then he may have been pulled out of the car. Even if the officer didn't have a valid reason, he could have come up with a valid reason. Even though it may have been a lie, he still could have come up with one, because we've seen that happen. The best thing to do would have been to, if it looks like it's going to go bad, ask for a supervisor immediately. If it looks like it's going to go bad, you ask for a supervisor immediately and you begin to record.
Yep.
And
that was my next question. Is legal to record here?
Yes.
Okay.
It's legal to record, and you start to record.
Okay.
If it looks like you're going to get jumped or whatever, get out of the car. It's not worth getting beat up for. But it's going to take a lot to get me out of a car.
Right.
It's going to take a lot.
And
And I'm going to, yeah. Huh?
Recently, the Highway Patrol was sued by the ACL for a two-step process that the law enforcement officers do in Kansas. And so you kind of described part of that when you were saying after they say goodbye, and then they come back and ask you for another question. Because I guess the way the law reads is once they say goodbye to you, you should leave. Because other than that, they're opening up the door for another
Investigation.
kind of like another start. And so
Right.
what's been happening is, particularly on Highway 70 and some other I-35 way out north, they've been pulling over a lot of people and seizing and forfeiting their property, their money, and things like that. And so, are you familiar with that lawsuit that's going on right now?
Not the lawsuit, the process, but not the lawsuit.
Okay, yeah, they actually have sued the state of Kansas and the Highway Patrol because of that process that you described there.
One of the things is that they have to release you within a reasonable amount of time. That the stop cannot be unreasonable. And once they tell you goodbye, the first phase of that stop has ended. And then the second phase begins when they re-engage you and say, hey, just out of curiosity, I want to ask you a question. You wouldn't happen to have any hand grenades, bazookas, kilos, or anything like that in the car. And of course, you're going to say, because you've been stopped already and you're yielding to their authority, you're going to answer their question. And the minute you answer your question and say no, then they're going to say, well, you know, sometimes I just like to check. Do you mind if I check your vehicle? It's not going to take very long, you know, and you'd be surprised at how many people say no. And the officer says, well, if you don't let me, I'm going to get a dog and he's going to come out and he's going to walk around your car and stuff like that. And people will then say yes. But what they don't know is that he cannot hold you for a reasonable amount of time, number one. And number two, it's illegal, or it used to be illegal anyway, that if he can't get access to a dog for him to tell you that he's going to get a dog, and he can't produce a dog, he can't do that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. You know, unfortunately, I think we know from our perspective as Black people that the law is not applied equally to us, and that
Absolutely.
a lot of the times these officers don't give a damn about anything that you just mentioned. You know, I remember being home in 2012, and my mother was, you know, terminally sick with cancer, and we got into an argument because she wanted to eat some Popeyes, and I was mad at her for eating some Popeyes. You know, I was just like, you know, why are you still eating this Popeyes? You know, I was trying to fix, manage, and control because I was scared of losing my mama. So, you know, I went on a walk, and I was stopped by the police right there on 13th, 24th in Minnesota. You know, and the city, there is no sidewalks in that area. So, but the city easement is right there. City easement is about 3 feet or so into people's property. And so I did exactly what you said, you know, because I knew my rights. Now, you can't ask me what I'm doing. I said, what you doing? He asked me what I'm doing. I said, what you doing? You know, then he got upset with me because I'm a smart, you know, so now he's like, well, I need your ID. No, you don't. According to the 4th Amendment of the Constitution, so long as I'm not operating a motor vehicle, I ain't got to give you nothing. I'm not identifying myself to you, and I'm about to go about my way. Am I being detained? You know, I then called Levanta at that time, who then spoke to Norman and didn't do nothing, of course. You know, but anyway, you know, that ticket ultimately, I think I had to pay that ticket, but, you know, it was ridiculous because they had to find something, you know, that they detained me because they had to find something that I was doing. I had to pull out their handbook, and I said, show me the ordinance, you know, and they said, well, I'm walking on the street. And I'm like, well, where the sidewalk at? You know, are you asking me to walk through people's yards, you know, at 10 o'clock at night on 24th in Minnesota with no street lights? Okay, great. You know, let me see how that potentially will turn out. The same thing happened here in Chicago when I was driving there. Representative Finney said, because marijuana has been legalized in a lot of different states, these state troopers are erroneously stopping people. You know, I had out-of-state tags. I drove a nice car. You know, they stopped me. Lied and tried to call the dog out, you know, and these cops that train these dogs, they do so and tell them, you know, they have little things that they can say to the dogs to make the dog give a false alert, you know, and the officer gonna say, man, she and sat down on that trunk. Well, she can sit down on the trunk all she wants. Ain't nothing in there. And this after they pulled me out, after I'd asked all those questions, why am I being stopped? Here's my information, provided all that stuff, insurance paid up, everything's good, they wouldn't tell me anything. I wasn't able to get the information back. When I'm asking for a supervisor, I don't get one. So those things happen very regularly and quite frequently. So my recommendation for people is to record them, because again, those body cameras are on us. Those cameras in their cars are on us. A dash cam costs less than, you can probably get one on eBay for less than $40 now, or on Amazon. Get you a dash cam for your car, one that swivels and can turn back. Every time I'm stopped, I got my dash cam on them because I know they got a camera on me, and go live on Facebook.
Go live.
Mm-hmm.
So I know that we are at time for sure, and I do need to wrap up. Thank you so much, Representative Finney, because you touched on some things that we can do in our community with voting. You hit on that very early on. So I know that that's one of the main things. I'm going to ask everybody to give me your final thoughts, but in your final thoughts, please include briefly, how can we move forward? What things do we need to be focused on right now? We had rallies. We had some successful rallies and some protests. Now a lot of people are saying, what now? What do we do? What alliances do we build? How do we move this agenda forward to address this disparity and address this continual issue that keeps coming up? What do we do now? So I actually want to start with you, Representative Finney, on your final thoughts and how to move forward.
Well, you're right. I mean, we do need to register and make sure we get to the polls, particularly in the general election. But also, I think it's important that we continue to build allies with Native Americans, Hispanics, the Asians. We all need to come together collectively and work on this as a unified group, because it's going to be hard to do it alone. At the same time, remember, in the legislature, we got to get some laws going, but the only way we can really get that done is of getting the right people in office that represent our interest.
Thank you. Mr. Wash, give us your final thoughts and how we move forward. What do we need to do?
Next steps for me is, don't just sit down when the cameras stop rolling. When the protest is over with, it's gonna take some work. Everything that I've been able to accomplish thus far has been a year's worth of effort. So these white supremacy don't take a vacation. So neither should we. In terms of continuing to address these issues on a day-to-day basis, stay in constant contact with your representative, regardless of who they are, or what they may look like,
Sure.
Stay in constant contact with them and be willing to hold them accountable. Let them know that you ran on a platform that was meant to serve us. If you don't deliver on these things, maybe we need to get somebody new in that can deliver on these things, and then be willing to support them to get those policy platforms implemented, because it takes going to Topeka, it takes calling Topeka, it takes organizing outside of the Black areas in order to be able to get people that agree with us into office, because progressives are all over, so we can't just focus on areas and be in our echo chambers. We got to get outside of our echo chambers and people that agree with us, and go organize those people in other communities that also agree with us and get them to run for office. In addition to that, I think it's very important that we begin to get some new DAs in that can kind of close that loophole on the 13th Amendment, which legalizes slavery. Slavery is still legal. A lot of people don't know that. So we need new district attorneys. Ultimately, what Representative Finney was talking about, making sure that we're taking the protests, putting some action into it, and more importantly, following through.
Awesome. Thank you. Mr. Ward?
I think that one of the things that we have to do is we have to quit looking at it as somebody else's job. Somebody else will do it. You have to become involved in one way or another. Now, maybe you're not a person to be on the front lines, but the people on the front lines need support. So maybe you can support in other ways, but we have to find a way to move forward as a mass group. Little individual groups are not going to have a lot of impact. It's just like a finger on a hand. It doesn't have a lot of impact alone, but when you bring them together, it makes a mighty fist.
Sure.
And so we're going to have to learn to band together, bring our groups together. There's no reason to reinvent the wheel. Bring everybody together and let's move forward as a group collectively. And it's everybody's job. And the thing is, we can't just say, or we can't just let the time pass and wait for the next opportunity. We have to seize the moment now. The stage has been set. Let's seize the moment and move forward.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Cruz?
Well, first of all, DeJuan, when are you putting your hat in the ring? Because it sounds like you need to be running for office pretty darn soon. But, you know, I don't really want to reiterate what y'all said because it's so true. I think encouraging people like DeJuan, like those people who stand out, who are educated, who understand the process to run for office, because it's scary and people need support. And then finding those people who are running right now and give your money. Put your money where your mouth is, even if it's just $20, because I'm telling you, anytime I got a little ding that someone gave me $10 to $15, I was like, oh, it kept the wheels moving. Finding those people who have the values that you have, and making sure that you support them financially. And lastly, it's a marathon. So if you're not going to run today, this is what people do. They move into places that they want to run. Those seats that they want to take, you move. Move to the places where you want. If you find a position, an elected position that you think that you would be good at, move to that place. Think 3, 4, 5 years in advance. We have got to start thinking like that, because that's how this system got the way it is now. They're very calculated in how they handle and pick off these seats. And we have to have every single level. So start thinking long-term. And okay, sorry, one more thing. Children, we got to teach our children. I take my children anytime I can, anywhere they go. I keep saying that involved children become active adults, and we need to understand how this next generation of children are going to see things and the beauty and fresh minds that they have, and teaching them love. So that's what I would suggest.
Absolutely. Pastor Mike?
Well, thank you to everyone that joined this conversation. It's a wealth of information. What I would like to see going forward, I wish DeJuan was here in Wichita. I believe honestly that we need some leadership. I think we have great leaders like Representative Finney and Aletha Faust and Brandon Johnson. For some reason, I haven't heard about us coming together for a meeting to strategize. Doesn't mean that's not happening, but I haven't heard it. And I think a lot of the viewers of this broadcast would like to hear about any next step meetings in regards to the information that you all shared, educating the people that are out there looking to actually make change happen. We can protest every day, but unless we are changing policy, unless we're actually changing the culture, the environment, the leadership, and really getting into our legislative ears, we need to know who those persons are, what legislature needs to be passed, who we need to call. There's a lot of education, I believe, that we need in our community, but it won't start until we actually start meeting and gleaning that from leaders like yourselves. So thank you once again for being a part of this.
All right. Thank you all for being here. I just want to say, if you believe that all lives matter, then you will believe that Black lives matter. So I'm here with good tea. We're glad to be here. Next Tuesday, we'll be here again at 6 p.m. Thank you so much to all of our guests. Keep educating yourself, keep educating your families, learn your rights, and vote. I know that it's easy to point at the head and talk about our president right now or whoever is the leadership, but there's so many local things on a local level that we need to be educated about that make these local laws that affect us daily. So make sure that you educate yourself, not only for the presidential, but all the smaller elections that we sometimes don't pay attention to. So have a good day. We look forward to seeing you guys next Tuesday.
Thanks all.